years in office, Prime Minister Modi continues to be the single most popular political leader in India. And according to a recent survey called Global Leader Approval Rating Tracker, carried out by Morning Consult, a US-based consultancy firm, Prime Minister Modi continues to be the most popular leader in the world. He is someone who's credited with transforming India's foreign policy and having made unparalleled contribution to the country's rising global stature. Therefore, it's only fitting that on his 73rd birthday, we analyze Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy, the major accomplishments and challenges. And we must begin with the phenomenal success of the recent G20 summit held in New Delhi. At a time when most people were skeptical about whether there would even be a joint statement at the end of the summit, given the sharp divergence of views among member states on the Russia-Ukraine war and the intransigent positions taken by many, India, under Prime Minister Modi, pulled off what seemed like the impossible. After deft negotiations, evolving a consensus, bringing all countries on one page, ironing out major differences over the language in the document, and in the end, ensuring a unanimous adoption of the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration, with everyone from the United States to Russia and China giving it their stamp of approval. As India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant pointed out, the diplomats held over 200 hours of relentless negotiations, but in the end, they pulled in the weight of Prime Minister Modi to seal the deal. And as he announced the adoption of the declaration with the bang of the gavel, amid thunderous applause on day one of the summit, it was clear as daylight that India had indeed arrived on the global stage, and Prime Minister Modi had cemented his position as one of the tallest leaders in the world. Someone who is now seen as a unifier, not to mention Prime Minister Modi's initiative of getting the African Union permanent membership of the G20 becoming a reality, and how his vision turned India's G20 presidency into a people's presidency unlike any other, and has set an important precedent and benchmark for future G20 presidencies. On the eve of the summit, Prime Minister Modi held bilateral talks with US President Joe Biden, further strengthening the India-US strategic partnership. A day after the summit, he hosted the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman as a state guest, highlighting how India has been building on its relationship with the Middle East. Earlier this year, Prime Minister Modi undertook what was widely described as a historic state visit to the United States, where the bilateral relationship was taken to the next level, with some unprecedented defense deals involving technology transfer being inked. President Biden said the India-US partnership would be the defining partnership of the 21st century. And Prime Minister Modi, known for his penchant for acronyms, said at a major tech event that AI, that stands for artificial intelligence, can be redefined as America and India, highlighting the significance of the relationship in the emerging geopolitical scenario. Soon after, the Prime Minister went to France as the chief guest on the French National Day, where President Emmanuel Macron not only rolled out the red carpet for him and referred to him as his dear friend, but also conferred on him the Grand Cross of the Legion of Honor, France's highest civilian and military honor. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the world has been divided more than ever in recent history. But if there is one country that has managed to balance its ties with both Russia and the Western Bloc, it is India. Asserting its strategic autonomy, India under Prime Minister Modi decided not to succumb to international pressure, as it refused to condemn Russia owing to the long-standing friendship and strategic ties between the two countries, and even increased its oil imports from Russia in the face of Western sanctions on Moscow, making it clear that India's interests and those of its people would be placed above everything else. Even European hypocrisy on this issue was repeatedly called out. But at the same time, India has been clear from the get-go that peace and dialogue can be the only way forward. Prime Minister Modi's words of advice to President Putin that this is not an era of war resonated globally, were echoed by many world leaders, and even found a mention in both the Bali G20 communique and the G20 New Delhi Leaders' Declaration. Over the years, India under Prime Minister Modi has taken a very tough stance on Pakistan-sponsored terrorism, not only repeatedly calling out the hostile neighbor at all possible multilateral forums, but also demonstrating India's intent with the army's surgical strikes in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and the Balakot airstrikes carried out within Pakistani airspace to send out an unmistakable message across. However, what has been and remains the biggest foreign policy challenge for India and Prime Minister Modi is the China challenge. Relations between the two countries have been extremely strained since the Galwan clashes of 2020 between the two militaries. China's provocations have been endless since then in the form of incursions along the line of actual control. A recent map released by Beijing that included Arunachal Pradesh and Aksai Chin in Chinese territory, and the decision of the Chinese President Xi Jinping to skip the G20 summit in Delhi. China has been repeatedly accused of grabbing Indian territory in a systematic, treacherous and brazen fashion, even building infrastructure and settlements within Indian territory along the line of actual control. And the Modi government has been accused by the opposition and critics of failing to rein in China on this front. The question we're asking on this special show is this: has Prime Minister Modi truly redefined India's foreign policy? Has he catapulted India to an unprecedented global stature? And how will he tackle the China problem going forward?
एक खुशखबरी मिली है। हमारी टीम्स के हार्डवर्क से और आप सभी के सहयोग से नई दिल्ली G20 लीडर्स समिट डिक्लेरेशन पर सहमति बनी है। मेरा प्रस्ताव है कि इस लीडर्स डिक्लेरेशन को भी एडॉप्ट किया जाए। मैं इस डिक्लेरेशन को एडॉप्ट करने की घोषणा करता हूं। इस अवसर पर मैं हमारे मंत्रीगण, शेरपा और सभी अधिकारियों का हृदय से अभिनंदन करता हूं, जिन्होंने अथाक परिश्रम करके इसे सार्थक किया है और इसलिए वे सभी अभिनंदन के अधिकारी हैं। मैं यही कामना करता हूं और 140 करोड़ भारतवासी भी यही कामना करते हैं कि भारत का तिरंगा और अमेरिका का स्टार एंड स्ट्राइप्स हमेशा नई ऊंचाइयां छूते रहे। राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन, डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन एक बार फिर आपके स्नेह भरे निमंत्रण के लिए, आपके गर्मजोशी भरे स्वागत और आतिथ्य सत्कार के लिए मैं आपका और 140 करोड़ हिंदुस्तान वासियों की तरफ से आभार प्रकट करता हूं। जय हिंद। गॉड ब्लेस अमेरिका। पोस्ट कोविड काल में वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर एक नया रूप ले रहा है। इस कालखंड में भारत और अमेरिका की मित्रता पूरे विश्व के सामर्थ्य को बढ़ाने में पूरक होगी। ग्लोबल गुड के लिए वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और समृद्धि के लिए दोनों देश साथ मिलकर काम करने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। हमारी मजबूत स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप डेमोक्रेसी की ताकत का स्पष्ट प्रमाण है। का युवा विशेष करके टैलेंट के कारण आज विश्व में अपनी पहचान बना रहा है। तो टैलेंट और टेक्नोलॉजी का ये मिलन मैं समझता हूं कि अपने आप में एक उज्जवल भविष्य के लिए गारंटी लेकर के आया है। ये सुबह कुछ ही मित्रों के बीच की है, लेकिन ये सुबह उज्जवल भविष्य की गारंटी लेकर के आई है। और मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन का इस महत्वपूर्ण, भले ही छोटी हो, लेकिन मैं कहता हूं ये होनहार है, ये शानदार है और ये धारदार भी है और ये आने वाले भविष्य को बनाने वाली है। और इसलिए एक उज्जवल भविष्य की आशा अपेक्षा के संकल्प के साथ हम सब लोग राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन का जो विजन है, भारत के जो एस्पिरेशंस है, राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन के पास जो ताकत है और भारत के पास जो संभावनाएं हैं, उन सबको लेकर के आगे चलने का एक मक्कम निर्धार का ये अवसर है। और इसके लिए मैं सचमुच में मेरे मित्र रहमान को बहुत अभिनंदन करता हूं, क्योंकि उन्होंने जब भारत की यात्रा की, काफी समय निकाला और उन्होंने खुद ने जो अनुभव किया और उन्होंने आकर के यहां इसको आगे बढ़ाया। मैं आपका भी आभारी हूं और राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन जी का जितना आभार करूं उतना कम है। मैं फिर एक बार आप सबका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद करता हूं।
All right. So has Prime Minister Narendra Modi reimagined and redefined India's foreign policy? Let's discuss this with our panel of experts. Joining me on the show today is Ambassador Shashank, former Foreign Secretary of India, and Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, former Indian diplomat. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Ambassador Shashank, if I could start with you, as it is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 73rd birthday today, we thought it's only fitting that we analyze the Modi foreign policy, especially given that this occasion comes close on the heels of the phenomenal success of the recent G20 summit. We will look at the specifics in terms of accomplishments and challenges in a moment. But first, sir, if I could have your overview of India's foreign policy under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership over the last 9 years, how do you think it's evolved?
I think there's a tremendous achievement by Prime Minister Modi. When he became the Prime Minister, everybody said that while he had been a great administrator, but he would have very little experience of foreign policy matters. And since he does not know too many of the foreign policy practitioners, it will take him some time before he really makes up his mind how to conduct the foreign policy. But within 9 years, what we have seen is that not only has he given a very strong push to the Indian foreign policy priorities being accepted by the other countries in the world, but what he has done is that it is no longer that India is being seen as somebody replacing Pakistan in the American calculation or the Western calculations, but it is really now that India, what are India's views? It is not that they are expecting that India would do certain things, would become more liberal, would become more democratic and all that, because they know that India is a democracy and it is in its DNA that it keeps in mind all the civilizational heritage of one earth and one family. That means that it is not just the world human-centric, but it is the nature-centric, everyone earth-centric. So it's no longer even the America-China relationship. It's much more than that. And they have decided that now it will be AI, that is America and India together would be working on this. And India's views have been accepted by the Americans and all the countries in the world. So when you say that Chinese have appreciated, the Russians, of course, and the Americans, they've all appreciated what Prime Minister Modi and his team achieved in G20 in Delhi Declaration. I think that is something remarkable. So it is really, I would say, it's a great achievement and many more things to come. I remember when we were working 20 years ago, we were thinking in terms of how to get out of the sanctions imposed by the West on India's technical capabilities. And we were able to move ahead on next steps for strategic partnership. with the United States and other Western countries. Now, what Prime Minister Modi has achieved, that this is really a defining partnership, not only as an objective, but as something which is very much close to realization, and where the practical steps have been taken by both America and India to work together in the critical and emerging technologies, in the various cyberspace and the space itself. So that is something really great.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir, for your opening remarks. Let me now take this to Ambassador Sajjan Har. Sir, you know, the dehyphenation between India and Pakistan, I think, is now complete. The process, of course, started a long time ago. Now we are told AI stands for America and India. There is no doubt that India's foreign policy has come a very long way, especially in the last 9 years. The recent visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the United States not only cemented the India-US strategic partnership, taking it to the next level given the kind of unprecedented defense deals that were inked, but it also announced the arrival of India on the global stage. And if we needed any further evidence of that, it came with the G20 summit, its phenomenal success, and what Ambassador Shashank describes as a remarkable achievement, the fact that at a time when, no two countries, it seemed, saw eye to eye on the Russia-Ukraine war, India managed to bring all of them on one page, and we had a unanimous adoption of the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration, something that seemed to be virtually impossible. India today is one of the few countries, sir, that has very strong friendly ties with the United States on the one hand and Russia on the other. Not many countries can boast of that. Do you believe that Prime Minister Narendra Modi today is seen as a global statesman and a great unifier?
Yes, I would tend to agree with that, Neha. First of all, thank you very much for having me on your show. It's a very important show. It's a very momentous day. It's a very important occasion. So to be on your show, I'm truly pleased and delighted.
Thank you, sir.
So when you say that has Prime Minister Modi and India emerged as a unifier, as a consensus builder, as a consensus maker, I would tend to agree with you, because you are very right when you say that when all the leaders were coming into Delhi for the G20 summit on the 8th of September, I think the sort of statements that were made, whether it was by the representatives of the European Union, it was by Mr. Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, it was made by Sergei Lavrov, etc., their positions were very far apart. And, having gone through the experience of Bali, no one really expected that, number one, it would be an easy task. Number two, whether we would be able to get there at all, because Bali had been dumped and trashed by Russia and China last December itself. It had been signed in November, but by December, Russia and China had dissociated themselves from it. So for this agreement to come, the consensus declaration, to come on the first day itself, I think this is nothing short of a miracle. And if you speak to all the Indian leaders, whether it is Dr. Jaishankar, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, or Sherpa Amitabh Kant, or Harsh Shringla, I think all of them, one factor that really helped in making this come about was the stature and the personal hands-on engagement and involvement of Prime Minister Modi. And, it is a fact you have mentioned about how India has, good relations across the board, our foreign policy of multi-alignment. So I think number one, one of the very important aspects was that most of the leaders, all the leaders, wanted the Indian presidency, G20 presidency, to be a success. And that, of course, people say that, do personal chemistry, personal relations, personal rapport, comfort level, etc. Do they play a role as far as foreign policy is concerned? I would say yes. To a certain extent, of course, your interests also have to align. And I think here we can see that definitely the people wanted India to succeed. They wanted India's G20 presidency. Of course, there are other reasons also, that they wanted G20 to continue to be a viable platform where, different countries, whether they are from the G7, emerging economies, Russia, China, all of them have a platform to get together. That was also one of the reasons. I think another aspect that we have to keep in mind is that possibly today, when there is so much of turbulence in the world, whether it is the divide between the developed and the developing countries, north-south divide, or it is the polarization, the very steep polarization between the East and the West. The West, of the United States and G7 countries, Western Europe on one side, and Russia and China on the other. I think it's only India is one of the few countries, if not the only country, that straddles across these divides and that is able to communicate with the leaders on all sides. You would recall that just before G20, Prime Minister Modi had a conversation with President Putin. And on the eve of G20, he had a long conversation with President Biden also. So I think it is his personal stamp, personal initiative. The fact, I think, that Prime Minister Modi, just a day before the start of the G20 summit, he took the decision to fly to Indonesia, Jakarta, for the East Asia summit. I think it sent out a very strong message that this is a leader who's willing to invest his own political capital and clout for the success of some other's success. Then we also need to get around and support him.
Absolutely. Yeah. The personal stamp that you refer to, I think, is unmistakable. Ambassador Shashank would agree on that. Ambassador Shashank, it's very interesting that, after the G20 summit, India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant, while speaking to the media, said that, yes, we had 200 hours of non-stop and very tough and ruthless negotiations. But in the end, when we presented the final draft before all the member states, I said one thing to them. Now, if you have a problem with this draft, your leader can talk to my leader. Mr. Khan says, in the end, I pulled in the weight of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Also, in an interview that I did with the spokesperson for the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, Stefan Dujarric, when I asked him to comment on India's G20 presidency and how the summit had been conducted, he said one thing repeatedly, that India is a great bridge builder. Therefore, my question to you is, from the days of non-alignment, has India now come to a stage where we are adherents to multi-alignment, so to speak? And is Prime Minister Narendra Modi today seen as a global statesman, as a consensus builder, as a unifier, somebody whose words of advice to President Putin that this is not an era of war have resonated globally?
Yes, you're quite right. India is no longer in the camp thinking only in terms of non-alignment or strategic autonomy. What we are doing, not even multi-alignment, it is really issue-based partnerships and moving across the various partnerships in a seamless manner so that we are not trying to create differences and see what we can achieve from different groups. But what we are trying to do is make sure that every country in the world feels that their voice has been given importance and that they should work together. So this is what happened when we tried to get the G20 to become G21 with the African Union added to it. This is what we had discussed in the BRICS summit to add a few more countries so that those who felt that their food security and energy security interests had not been taken care of during the Ukraine crisis, they would be able to have a greater say during the BRICS Plus new gatherings from next year. And of course, as Ambassador Sajanahar has said, that in East Asia, where we have had for a long time our look east and act east policies, I think we have really, Prime Minister Modi was very mindful that these partners and neighbors of India and China should not feel that India is so much concerned only about the global image that it is forgetting the obligations towards the Asian partners. So he went there, and whatever time he had, he was able to spend together with all these countries in Asia for the East Asia Summit and the dialogue with India. And I think this has made a tremendous impact. I must say that Prime Minister Modi has really himself to be a very adept practitioner of foreign policy matters, and I'm quite sure that in future, books will not be written on many European practitioners of diplomacy, but I think Indian Prime Minister would be considered as one of the greatest diplomat par excellence.
Well, that is definitely a huge compliment and tribute to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's foreign policy, and with good reason. Gentlemen, for you and for our viewers, I want to quickly read out the salient points that we have collated as part of a graphic that summarizes some of the high points of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's foreign policy over the last 9 years. I'd like to quickly go through it before I come back to you. Now, the Prime Minister's tenure has undoubtedly seen active and high-profile diplomacy. There have been frequent visits by him to foreign countries and engagement with world leaders. In the very recent past, we've seen top world leaders descending in India, even in the run-up to the G20 summit, not just for the summit. There is no doubt that the Prime Minister is very, very popular, perhaps the single most popular Prime Minister with the Indian diaspora. And he's very actively engaged with the Indian diaspora during every foreign visit of his. He's tapped into the emotional and cultural connect of overseas Indians. There have been many foreign policy initiatives that have been framed in alignment with what some would call a nationalist agenda. Russia, for example, is a case in point. When India, decided to increase its Russian oil imports in the face of Western sanctions, it was made abundantly clear by Dr. Jaishankar, our foreign minister, to everyone that India's interests and the interests of the Indian people would be placed above everything else. And, India, in its foreign policy over the last decade or so, has increasingly emphasized on global issues such as climate change, the global fight against terror, and tried to bring everyone together. And then, of course, there has been an effort and outreach to attract foreign investments through multiple campaigns such as Make in India, which is almost synonymous with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's tenure as Prime Minister. Ambassador Sajjan Har, let me come to you now. Apart from the phenomenal success of the G20 summit, which we have dissected and debated, quite extensively since the event itself, what, according to you, have been some of the highest points of Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy? I want to get into specifics now.
That's a big challenge, Neha, because there are so many of them. And, it will be very difficult to identify just 1, 2, or 3 of them. Let me put it this way, that if I were to describe Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy, I've used words like multi-alignment, I've used words like strategic alignment, in terms of looking at our interest. I would describe, if I had 3 words to describe, I would say that it is bold, it is confident, and it is compassionate. So let me very quickly, without going into very many details, go through this. One, in terms of boldness, I think the manner in which India has been able to expand its outreach to its strategic partners, particularly, to the United States, Japan, Australia, Europe, all of them. And that has been phenomenal. You did mention about the United States, so I'll just mention 2 more sentences. When Prime Minister Modi was invited to visit Washington, D.C., and he was there in New York for the International Yoga Day also. It is, the state visits in the United States are very infrequent to come by. They are quite rare. In Mr. Biden's tenure, this was the 3rd state visit of his last 3+ years that he's been in office. So it is, he was invited on a state visit. And then he was invited also to address the joint session of the US Congress. Again, he was invited earlier in 2016. There is no other Indian leader who's been invited twice. There are very few world leaders who've been invited more than once to address the US joint session. And in that, you have names like Nelson Mandela and Winston Churchill. So, the manner in which this is a matter of optics, but in substance also, whether it is semiconductors, $10 billion investment, or it is GE 414 jet engines, transfer of technology. There are huge areas where we have taken the relationship forward. And similarly, it is with respect to our relations with Japan, with Australia. I think we really have taken them forward. Just one comment on that. When Prime Minister Modi visited Australia in 2014, I think it was November 2014, it was the first prime ministerial visit from India after 28 years. And after that, he was there again last year. So he has many places he has gone frequently, and that is this outreach is been the benefits of this outreach we have seen during the G20. As far as the confident part is concerned, I think the manner in which we have handled our relations with Russia, with great flair and finesse, while not being cagey about it, being upright about it, and explaining to the world why we are doing what we are doing. It's not that we are with Russia, we are on the side of peace, and we want peace through dialogue and diplomacy. And I think the world has also been able to see the argument and the logic of our policy. And the final thing in terms of compassionate is you look at the manner in which India rolled out its Vaccine Maitri initiative. We started our own vaccination program, Neha, on the 16th of January 2021, and you would recall that our first vaccines which went to our neighboring countries, that is to Bangladesh, to Nepal and Bhutan, was on the 20th of January. That is within 4 days. Now, many developed countries had huge stockpiles of vaccines. They did not share it with anyone.
That's right.
We went around to developing countries, to Africa, to Latin America, to Asia. So whether it is the sharing of our vaccines, or it is whenever there are any calamities, any disasters anywhere, we have not only helped our own people, but we have gone out of the way, whether it is in Nepal, the earthquake in Nepal, the earthquake in Turkey, we have been there for the help of the people. So I think the message that India wants to send and has been able to effectively send is that when India grows, it is not only for the benefit of its own people, India's growth is for the benefit of the world. So in that context,
Indeed,
I think India has been able to project itself in a much positive, favorable, and compassionate light.
Yes, that's very comprehensively explained, Ambassador Sajjan Har, and you're quite right. Amongst the many high points, the vaccine diplomacy certainly has been a very, very important one. Ambassador Shashank, let me come back to you, sir. It's very hard to encapsulate a decade of foreign policy on a single show, but we will still make a bold attempt at that. Since we are talking, and Ambassador Sajjan Har talked about some of the bold moves that have been made by India and its foreign policy under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, let's focus on that for a moment. In my view, apart from the remarkable success of the G20 summit, and the fact that the India-US strategic partnership has been taken to the next level under Prime Minister Modi, there are two chapters of India's foreign policy of the last few years that strike me as being particularly bold. One, the way we have dealt with Pakistan. Nobody can forget the surgical strikes that happened in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and nobody can forget the Balakot airstrikes that took place within the Pakistani airspace, sending out an unmistakable message to our hostile neighbor that we will not brook any efforts to, export terror to our country. And much more recently on the issue of Russia. Now, the Russia-Ukraine war has divided the world perhaps more than ever in its recent history. And yet, India is one of those handful of countries that has not only managed to maintain very cordial ties with the Western bloc on the one hand and Russia on the other, we refused to succumb to international pressure. We did not condemn Russia for its invasion of Ukraine because of our long-standing friendship and partnership with that country. When there were sanctions imposed by the West on Moscow. We actually increased our Russian oil imports, and it was made abundantly clear to the world that for India, national interest was paramount. What, according to you, sir, have been the biggest highlights? Would you agree with this take?
Okay, you want me to take on our relationship with Pakistan and Russia or USSR earlier. As far as Pakistan is concerned, somehow the leadership of Pakistan feels that they are the successors of the Mughal Empire or whatever the Muslim rulers of India, and therefore the whole of India should have gone to their army or their people rather than being divided or subdivided into different countries. Every time they gave impression that if only India would make concessions to Pakistan, there would be permanent peace between our two countries, and that will be the end of it. So you saw that Nehru-Liaquat Pact, when we said, all right, the Hindus in Pakistan would be taken care of the same way as the Muslims in India. Secondly, the Indus Water Treaty, where again we gave 80% of the water of the Indus waters and the other to Pakistan and kept only 20%, and out of that also about 80% is still going to Pakistan. Then thirdly, in Shimla Agreement, after the agreement, they said, look, this is the only opportunity for you to help democracy in Pakistan. And Bhutto got away with getting his 93,000 soldiers, and then he used them straight away in Balochistan. Then we saw this again. They say, okay, we will not be able to, we will control all the terrorist elements coming from any administered areas under the administrative control of Pakistan. That is the agreement with Vajpayee ji. And we found that the terrorism continued. They went to the largest centers in India, population centers, and also not only that, they say, okay, the foreigners who are coming to India, they should be targeted. So the Israelis should be targeted, Americans should be targeted. This is what they were doing. And then they were setting up their bases in Afghanistan or in the borders between India and between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And they were spreading terrorism to countries in South Asia and to other countries, even in Southeast Asia, etc. So I think this is the problem with Pakistan. Now, finally, the Pakistani people have realized, and countries like America and even China have realized, that Pakistan collects money for the hardships faced by Pakistani people, whether due to flooding, whether due to earthquakes, etc. But all the money is cornered by their limited number of politicians or army people. Ordinary people, they become worse and worse off. So this is how it has been going on. And lately we have been seeing that within Pakistan, there is a trouble that people want to join India from Baltistan, from Gilgit, from Balochistan. So many parts. And the Afghan government, which thought at one time that Pakistan was their great friend, now they are treating Pakistan as an enemy. So this is about Pakistan. I think India has been able to take a correct reading of Pakistan's attitudes. And fortunately, it's not just India, but also other countries of the West and other countries, they have realized that Pakistan is not to be relied upon. And recently we have seen Saudi Arabia and UAE and other member countries of the OIC that they want to now work closely with a technically qualified, with a very fast rising country like India, rather than keep on putting their money in a failing economy like Pakistan. Secondly, as regards Soviet Union and Russia, I would say that there was a time when the Russians thought that they would become part of Europe, and it will be a common European space. They would be able to put all their money and reserves in London and New York, and that will be the end of the old rivalries between the East and the West Europe. I think it was Mr. Putin who really took the view that no, there are friends on the East side, also in the Asian side, like India and even China and many other countries. So they continued, the Russians continued to build ties with the countries in Asia. And I think we have to appreciate that. Now, when we go to buy the Russian oil and other energy supplies, etc., we realize that we had hurt our interests when Americans told us that don't buy from Iran. So we stopped buying from Iran. at the detriment of the Indian economy and our energy supplies. So at this time, Prime Minister Modi was very clear-cut that Indian priorities should be taken care of. About 80% of Indian energy requirements are met through imports. So therefore, we are dependent very much. And then we found that most of the processed oil in Indian refineries was being purchased by Europeans. So which means that there is something which the West Europeans who were saying that no, don't buy from Russia, but at the same time, they were quite keen to buy processed oil without looking into where this the oil came from, which source. So I think these are the issues which are very important, and India has long-term relationship of mutual trust with the Russians. We are trying to build up this relationship with USA, France, and others. It will take time. I'm quite sure that what future will be after another 10 years, 15 years, we do not know. But what we know is that Prime Minister Modi has been able to lay very strong foundations for a relationship where USA, China, and India would be the three most important economies in the world, and they would be leading the world for some kind of what kind of a partnership we want to have with the other global south and with the other developed countries. USA has been telling India that, well, we should work together. And I think India for the time being has agreed to that position that India and USA should work together and try to see that China behaves in a civilized manner and keeps to its promises, whatever it has been telling the other Asian countries.
Right. There is no doubt that, India has asserted its strategic autonomy in a very emphatic manner in the last 1.5 years since the Russia-Ukraine war erupted. We've talked about how under Prime Minister Modi, India has built a stronger relationship with the United States, maintained its ties with Russia, two bitter adversaries. We've talked about the success of the G20 summit. We've talked about how a tough message has been sent out to Pakistan on the issue of terror, and of course how India is even building stronger ties with the Middle East. There has been a massive outreach on that front. But let's now discuss, we've talked about the accomplishments. Ambassador Sajjan Nahar, we also need to address the challenges. And I don't think you would disagree with me if I said that the biggest challenge for India's foreign policy and for Prime Minister Modi on that front is undoubtedly the China headache. There have been endless provocations by that country. Relations have nosedived since the Galwan clashes of June 2020. Recently they released a map including Indian territory in theirs. President Xi Jinping decides to skip the G20 summit. The question really is, and then of course the biggest one, critics have constantly accused the Modi government of failing to rein in an expansionist and hegemonic China, which it has been said, has been constantly making incursions in Indian territory along the line of actual control, even going so far as to build settlements and infrastructure in our territory along the LAC. Now, I don't know if that should be described as a failure, but it is certainly a huge challenge. How do you see it, sir? And what is the way forward?
Yeah, thank you very much, Neha. I rarely, if ever, disagree with you. And on this occasion, I will definitely not disagree with you. I agree that China represents the biggest challenge to us. And particularly over the last 3 years, April 2020, when China, in violation of its commitments under the agreement signed in 1993 and 1996, that they will not bring in their troops in large numbers or their armory, weaponry, and equipment in large numbers, that they went back on all these commitments and they put that together. But I think India also, the Indian response was very quick, very swift, and very robust. And so we have been there for the last 3.5 years. So it is, yes, I will not say that it is a failure, at least. In earlier times, there used to be what is called salami slicing of the Indian territory. I think ever since Prime Minister Modi has come, in terms of the infrastructure that has been created, that we have stopped the salami slicing there. There is the military deployment. There is, I will not say an eyeball to eyeball, but they are at the military deployment, it is at very close quarters. Now, before coming to respond as to what India needs to do, what is it doing, is it enough, is it adequate, what more it should be doing? Let me also say that all these reports that have been coming that villages are being settled near the Arunachal border, or China has taken this territory. I think this is all being done. I think it is all politics, in my view, unfortunately. And with a sensitive matter like this, politics should not be played, because all this, what is being done, whether it is the bridge on the Pangong Tso, or it is the building of these villages, or territory having been taken, all this has been taken from the period in 1959 to 1962. The 38,000 square kilometers of territory in Aksai Chin, that was taken in before 1962. And the territory on which villages are being constructed is my considered view that it is on the territory that was taken at that time. Now, on the map issue, 93,000 square kilometers of Arunachal Pradesh is being shown by them. India has totally rejected that map. It has said by giving new names or by putting some territory in your map, it doesn't make it your own. And it is not only India, there are other countries, Japan, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Nepal, Russia, they have all rejected this map and issued statements against it. Now, coming to the question as to what should India do? Before Prime Minister Modi's government came to power, there was no infrastructure that was being built in the border areas, because the thinking at that time, and this has been mentioned by the then Raksha Mantri on the floor of the parliament, that we don't want to make the infrastructure on our part, because if the Chinese are coming, they will also be able to use that infrastructure. So I think that is a very defeatist way, pessimistic way of looking at things. We have been, I think, in India over the last many years has been investing very significantly, whether it is in terms of building roads, tunnels, bridges, airports, etc., in those forward areas. And it was as a result of that we were able to put in place very quickly, 70,000 of our troops in the border areas in eastern Ladakh. Because when you would recall that when China moved its troops in April of 2020, it would have thought that India is too consumed with the COVID-19, because COVID had just then started. So let me, without going into details, let me, cut the details. But in addition to that, one is in terms of the infrastructure which we are doing. Number two is building up our economy, because that is the most important thing. If my pie is bigger, I will have a bigger proportion to invest in defense. And my pie is doing well over the last several years. Last quarter, we were 7.8% growth in GDP. Today, we are the fifth largest economy. In about 3-4 years, we are going to be the third largest economy, $5 trillion or so. So I think our economy needs to grow. And thirdly, we need to have good, strong external relations and external balancing. And in that context, whether it is the Quad, India, US, Japan, Australia, or our other linkages in the Indo-Pacific, they have been getting strengthened. We have been reinvigorating them. We have been making them more dynamic. And I think that is also very important. So across the board, we are adopting a multi-pronged approach to send out a message to China that India is not going to compromise on its territorial integrity and sovereignty. And without peace and normalization of relations at the border, we cannot have business as usual.
That message has been unmistakably sent across to President Xi Jinping. In fact, there were reports suggesting that he was quite cheesed off, that, Prime Minister Modi did not give him enough time for a bilateral dialogue on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. And that may have been one of the reasons why he was sulking and chose to skip the G20 summit in New Delhi. But that apart, Ambassador Shashank, let me ask you this. What would you say about the criticism that is leveled against the Modi government government, by the opposition and certain others who say that they have allowed China to make incursions into Indian territory and to grab our land, that India's China policy has failed in the last few years. How would you respond to that criticism? How big a headache is China and how do we address it?
No, first of all, I think we have to understand that the criticism is coming from what kind of quarters? There are quarters which handed over the Indian territory to China between 59 and 62. Secondly, whatever territory we handed over to Pakistan in POK, part of it, Saksham Valley, was handed over by Pakistan to China. Lately, Pakistan has been handing over the other parts of POK to China by inviting the Chinese troops and Chinese engineers to build projects in and through POK. So I think these are the people. And second type of people are those who in 1962 war used to go around in Calcutta saying China's chairman is our chairman. So those are the kind of people who now say that, well, India is losing the territories. I don't think so. I think there is some misunderstanding. Perhaps there should be greater discussions in the parliament and in the committees of the parliament so that the opposition politicians do not talk without the absolute briefing given by the government side. So that is very important because this is a weakness of democracy, that if people do not listen to what the government has been doing and then simply want to oppose, as Ambassador Sajanar also said, then this opposition only distresses the people who are fighting for India and who are trying to keep the Indian flag flying high against the Chinese attempts to have their soldiers on the Indian borders. And above everything else, the point is that LAC, there is no actual line. The maps have never been exchanged. So I think the idea is that we try to keep some kind of a broad area from where both Chinese and Indians should keep away. And that is the effort which we continue to make. And that is being used by many of the opposition parties without proper briefing from the government side or without attending these briefings to say that, well, India is losing territories and Modi is succumbing to Chinese pressures. I don't think so at all. So that is very important. That's number one. And the second thing I would say that so far we were only thinking in terms of land mass of South Asia or India. Now, Prime Minister Modi has given two new things. One is that Indian Ocean is the only ocean which is named after a country. And so he is paying a tremendous amount of attention to Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific area, the waters around India. Secondly, he is paying great attention to the civilizational heritage which has been carried by people of Indian origin all over the world. And he's built them into a kind of unofficial ambassadors of India, carrying goodwill for India. There was a time when these people felt that they were under pressure from the local governments or local communities. Right. Now they find that they are being respected by them.
There is no doubt, sir. The engagement that Prime Minister Modi has had with the Indian diaspora is absolutely unprecedented. My director tells me I'm completely out of time. But gentlemen, before I wrap up this discussion, I still want to ask you one quick question and very quick closing comments from both of you, starting with Ambassador Sajanhar. Going ahead, sir, what do you believe is going to be Prime Minister Narendra Modi's biggest foreign policy priority? And let's not forget, next year we go into the elections.
Yes, I think basically it's a good thing going for India. India is in a sweet spot. And so we need to continue to do with whatever we are doing. But as we have seen over the last 3 years, there is a great uncertainty. There's great instability in the world. We don't know how the Russia-Ukraine conflict is going to pan out, what is going to happen there. We've seen that there are enormous changes taking place in China, whether it's the economy, whether it's the youth unemployment, whether it is protests and demonstrations. So I think there is a lot of uncertainty. We have to be nimble-footed. We have to be on our feet. I think our strategic partnerships, whether it is with West Asia, whether it is with US, Europe, I think we need to strengthen that. basically focus on our economy. Once the economy is strong, we will be able to deal with all the challenges that come our way.
No doubt about that. The Prime Minister during his Independence Day address did say that he hopes that India will be a developed nation by 2047. We're already the 5th largest economy in the world, though of course we also have to recognize that the Chinese economy is 5 times the size of the Indian economy. We are making rapid strides, and the Chinese economy also seems to be in some sort of trouble at the moment, but that gulf still remains. Ambassador Shashank, very quickly, sir, biggest foreign policy priority for Prime Minister Modi going forward, do you believe it's going to be China? How do you look at it?
We have decided to set up infrastructure linkages, taking us to the west, to Europe, via Middle East, via West Asia. On the eastern side also, on the north-south also, we have set up a lot of corridors, a lot of multimodal infrastructural linkages. We need to implement them, number one. Secondly, the border areas through whom these linkages are built, they need to be given proper importance so that there is a tremendous amount of economic activity there and satisfaction among the people living there that they are part of this rising India and not fight among themselves.
All right. On that note, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to both of you. It's always so fantastic to have your perspective on global issues and India's foreign policy, and what better day than to discuss it on the occasion of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 73rd birthday. Thank you so much, Ambassador Shashank and Ambassador Sajanhar, for your time and perspective.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Neha.
Truly appreciate it, sir. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure for me. That's all the time we have on this special show on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 73rd birthday, as we looked back at India's foreign policy under his leadership. Hope you enjoyed watching the show. Thanks very much for joining us.
माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी को जन्मदिन की बहुत बहुत बधाई और शुभकामनाएं देता हूं, जिनका जीवन संगठन से लेकर सरकार तक हर किसी के लिए प्रेरणा है, जिन्होंने अपने जीवन में हर पल भारत मां की सेवा के लिए व्यतीत किया है।